Thanks for joining NoWeedIllinois.com. I'm Monty Larrick. Illinois lawmakers considering legislation that would legalize the recreational use of today's high-potency marijuana. No Weed Illinois opposes legalization, and we're encouraging voters to ask their state lawmakers to vote against legalization. We've been presenting a series of interviews with experts on marijuana, and we're joined now by Roger Morgan. Mr. Morgan is founder and chairman of the Take Back America campaign. For the past 20 years, he's been on the front lines of anti-drug activism at the local, state, and national levels. Mr. Morgan is the former chairman and executive director of the Coalition for a Drug-Free California, and he was the founding chairman of the Coronado Safe Foundation, a nonprofit dealing with drug prevention. He's a prior board member of the San Diego Prevention Coalition and a member of the National Coalition for Student Drug Testing. Mr. Morgan, what impact has marijuana had on your family?
Devastating impacts, Monty. I have two stepchildren that got addicted to marijuana and meth at age 12 and 14. That was roughly 32 years ago, when the potency of marijuana was nothing compared to what it is today. But I lived with addiction in my family for 20 years. Ultimately, the marriage failed for a lot of reasons. Drug addiction was a large part of that. But when you see the devastation to two otherwise beautiful young people caused by this drug, that was really the motivation for me to get involved.
And yours is just one family impacted by marijuana. There are countless others, aren't there?
You know, I think the statistics indicate about 1/3 of American families are impacted by addiction. And I can assure you, if you have one person in the family that is addicted or mentally ill because of this drug, it devastates the quality of life for everybody in the family.
Well, before we continue our conversation with Roger Morgan, here is a short video that will give you a good idea about the environmental damage that marijuana grow facilities are causing in California.
At the end of 2017, California had 50,000 illegal cultivation sites producing marijuana under the guise of medicine. According to marijuana industry leaders, California was already producing 8 times more marijuana than was consumed in California and supplying 60 to 70% of the entire U.S. black market. That's more than all other cartels combined. Check out this video.
Marijuana grows over the years, some of them legal, many illegal. But tonight, we're going to show you what is probably the most lethal pot farm we've ever seen. And as KPIX5's Wilson Walker explains, it's a problem that's popping up all across California.
This is a trek to a crime scene deep in Lassen National Forest. Through dense ground cover and brutal terrain, federal agents eventually make their way to what might well qualify as an industrial-scale farm operation.
And for 1717, this at least gives us let's say, minimum start date.
There are living quarters, kitchens, bathrooms, and trash dumps, all for the purpose of growing a lot of marijuana.
This one was in excess of 15,000 plants.
That's at least 5 separate plots spread across several miles, fed by an endless network of pipes, all drawing right from natural waterways.
25.2 liters per minute.
And scattered over all of this, there are the chemicals.
Yeah, 32 ounces of malathion.
In every direction, fertilizers, poisons, insecticides.
Dude, I don't know what's in this.
Yeah, the malathion, a lot of the pesticides, a lot of over-counter pesticides. You see a lot of those. Those are pretty common. You know, the uncommon ones are the restricted use pesticides like the carbofuran.
Carbofuran, an extremely toxic pesticide that's effectively banned in the United States, but fast becoming a favorite tool among Mexican drug cartels who operate in California's wildlands. Once a rare find, it's now turning up at 60 to 70% of these sites, often mixed in bottles that have no warning label.
A mountain biker, recreationist, a hiker, a child could be hiking out here, be unaware, think that is a full bottle of what would be vitamin water.
Which is lethal.
Which is extremely lethal. An eighth of a teaspoon would kill a 300-pound black bear.
And that's exactly what is happening. Illegal growers aren't just using carbo as an insecticide, they're using it to kill anything that wanders into their grows.
If you want to kill wildlife, then let's just go ahead and place poison in food and have wildlife come.
The bears that were photographed walking into this camp were probably dead within minutes, and agents are now routinely finding dead wildlife near illegal grows, with testing often proving carbofurin to be the killer.
This is a direct source of mortality for wildlife.
With this carbofurin and these pesticides, the creek's right below us.
The situation has become so toxic that cleaning up these sites now requires the help of hazardous materials experts who are frantically trying to figure out just how long carbofurin hangs around in soil and water.
In order to determine how lethal this is or how harmful this potentially may be for wildlife and humans.
To see any one of these sites is pretty shocking, and then you think that there are actually hundreds of these just in this area alone, and the budget to clean all of this up, well, there isn't one.
You know, we're probably approaching 400 sites already this year, and you know, you've seen one.
So the grows are an old problem, this illegal pink poison just a new lethal twist, and the toll it's taking on our forest land is just starting to surface.
The cost of environmental reclamation, if even possible, could exceed $50 billion. Neither the state nor the federal government has allocated resources to do that. Even now, they've been advised that the poison and contaminants are killing millions of birds, animals, and fish. These contaminants are seeping into water tables that literally serve millions of people. Rather than address these problems, the state has issued over 2,000 licenses to produce even more marijuana. Obviously, this marijuana isn't destined for California markets. How is it the federal and state governments can merely turn a blind eye to this problem?
Wow, $50 billion for environmental cleanup and a lot of dead animals. But Mr. Morgan, marijuana proponents in Illinois might argue that the video we just played involves illegal grow operations, and you won't have those problems in Illinois with closely monitored and regulated legal grow facilities.
I would tell anybody that believes that you need to look at California and Colorado. This is not just a problem on illegal grows. We have 50,000, at last count, 50,000 outdoor marijuana grows. And since that video was made a couple months ago, I get new information every week from the state on how many licenses they have now issued to grow marijuana. Last report was 4,887. And here we are in a saturated market where we can't consume even a fraction of what's produced here. But what we have learned is this theory of legalizing to get rid of the black market is bogus. I think only 16% of the grow sites in California are legal. The rest of them had an opportunity to register and they declined because they don't want to be controlled. So the poisons, the fertilizers, the pesticides are used at all grows, whether it's on illegal grow or illegal or legal grows. They all use the same thing. And the problem is it leaches into the soil, and then it leaches into water tables that are currently serving literally millions of people and farm animals. And there's no control over this. The state knows about it, and they said, unfortunately, we don't have any resources to deal with it. We don't test for those kind of toxins. But in one county alone, in Calaveras County, the last board of supervisors went on the theory that charging money for licenses and taxing was a good deal. It was catastrophic. Number one, they clear-cut forest, which decimated ecosystems for all kinds of wildlife. Then they used all these poisons, and in that one county alone, they serve 3.5 million people with their watershed, and the watershed is now becoming contaminated, and nobody can do anything about it. You can access that study. It's called silentpoison.com. From that study, just in that one county with 1,200 grow sites, the estimated reclamation costs were $2 billion. We have 50,000 of them. And if you extrapolate using those numbers, the real cost of cleaning up or reclaiming our lands, if that is even possible, would be 50 to 80 billion dollars. And I don't think you could ever reclaim it. And we've lost millions of animals and birds and fish. The other thing, it may not apply to Illinois, but here we are in a drought condition again in California. These plants consume 6 to 9 gallons of water per day per plant. And I don't know how many plants we have in California, but the state is going to ration water to 55 gallons a day per person. These grow sites are consuming billions of gallons of water.
And this is fresh water.
This is fresh water, or it was fresh.
All right. Why haven't environmental groups like the Sierra Club been a little bit more vocal about marijuana?
That's a very good question. I've asked Sierra Club the same question and didn't get a response. Dr. Morad Gabriel, who you saw in the video, asked to give a presentation to the Sierra Club, and they declined, saying too many of our people like marijuana. Well, I think too many of their donors, major donors, the ones that are pushing pot for profit, are also contributing to the Sierra Club. And here we have the greatest environmental disaster in California since the gold rush, where they used hydraulic mining. And Sierra Club has made no mention of that.
Wow. Wow. Well, you have a PowerPoint presentation that we need to get started on. So let's begin.
So basically, what I want to focus on is the environmental, economic, and the human impact in California. You can go to the next slide if you would. As we saw in the video, the disaster comes from the fact that these plants are very valuable for people that don't care about the environment or the human impacts of what they're growing. But the poisons, pesticides, fertilizers, and human waste are really killing millions of wildlife, and they're polluting streams, seepage into the water sheds. They're threatening millions of people, and there's no resources to clean it up. And what's happened because of that, the whole burden of public safety, environmental protection has fallen to the lowest level, to local law enforcement, and they simply don't have the resources to deal with this problem.
Well, would there be enough marijuana tax revenue generated to pay for the cleanup?
Not even close. It's a joke. I mean, we know with alcohol and tobacco that the social cost exceed income by 10 times. And marijuana has the problem of the environmental reclamation costs on top of that. Plus, there's a lot of other harms of marijuana that, in my opinion, are a lot more dangerous than alcohol. Now, I would say alcohol in moderation, but we can talk about those human harms in a minute. But the bottom line is we're destroying the environment. In Calaveras County, I just saw on TV last week that they're putting fish back into the streams. The streams were very prolific in terms of trout fishing for a long time. Now they hardly catch any trout at all. So we're destroying our environment, and the economic cost of trying to collect taxes, you can't even come close. There's no way to basically control growing an illicit drug to begin with. But I think the amount of money that California has spent just on the internal department to create this program probably will exceed income for the next 20 years. Anybody that believes that the economics are favorable to legalizing a drug that basically destroys our kids is ridiculous. And that was part of the way that they sold Prop 64 in California. Incidentally, that campaign was financed by in-state drug money, $11 billion, and out-of-state billionaire money, to the tune of $22 million. So $35 million, $35 million total to convince California voters to do something that is so detrimental not only to our environment, but because of the impacts on our youth, has the potential of destroying California as we've known it. You can't even take a hike in our national forest anymore without fear of getting shot.
Wow. You mentioned that folks who like to fish are having a hard time catching trout now. If you did, would they be safe to eat?
No, that's a major concern, not just with trout and fish, but with game animals as well. They're finding pesticides and poisons in game meat anymore. So we're really destroying wildlife in all forms. And in Northern California, where the Emerald Triangle, which has been pot growing area for a long time on a lesser scale, but because these plants use so much water, they're diverting water out of streams, like all of the water, so it kills everything downstream. And we had some of the most pristine ecosystems in that area ever, but it's killing this salmon and steelhead population. It's just catastrophic. And the wildlife, as Dr. Gabriel will tell you, you don't see birds anymore. The famed spotted owl, which shut down the lumber industry, I think is almost gone again. We shut down the industry to protect the bird, and now the birds are being poisoned. And then everything that eats the poisoned bird is susceptible to poison as well. So it's a disaster.
All right, your next PowerPoint.
That's as you saw in the video, carbofuran is a banned poison in the United States. This beautiful family of bears, the picture was taken from the Sierra Club website. Kind of the height of hypocrisy, in my opinion, that they don't point out to Sierra Club members just how bad this is. But that family, hopefully that's not the family that was headed to the grow site. But keep in mind, we have 50,000 grow sites, and 70% of them surveyed so far are using carbofuran. So that whole family could have been dead within minutes. Oh. You see the spotted owl in the picture, and you see the dead fish and raccoons. This is catastrophic. This was the study that was done in Calaveras County. I would encourage anybody to look at it at silentpoison.com. In this one county alone, which is just east of Sacramento, they had 1,200 illegal grow sites. Even the licensed growers never abide by the environmental rules. You're talking about people that are growing an illicit drug that is harmful to humans, and they couldn't care less about the rules. So, and there's not enough people to enforce it. You'll find the same thing in Illinois. You'd have to have an army of people to even try to enforce this. So everything that they studied, 2/3 of the local ponds tested positive for cyanobacteria, which is proven deadly to humans, fish, and animals. They got diesel fuel in the streams. The toxins leaching into the soil and then turn the watersheds that serve 3.5 million people. Again, the water consumption over the top. I don't know what California is going to do as we regulate this for people, but not marijuana grows. But anyway, this was a study that indicated in their county alone, if they follow OSHA requirements and forestry rules, keep in mind we're talking about hazardous materials in the cleanup. In that one county alone, they were looking at $2 billion. And we got 50,000 sites. So it would take literally an army to even attempt to clean this up anymore. But again, 50 to 80 billion dollars. Anybody thinks this is good economic policy to cultivate and sell marijuana for the tax income needs to spend a little more time studying the reality of this situation.
So you say it would take an army to enforce this. So in Illinois, that means we have to set up another government bureaucracy
Yes,
to regulate marijuana.
absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd mention, if you want to go to the next slide, is the environmental impact is not limited to rural areas. This stuff smells like skunk. And when they've moved into areas, because now a lot of communities have decided you can grow marijuana in your backyard, the neighbors can't open their windows anymore. The stench is so bad. You can't go outside for a barbecue, or the kids can't play outside. The other problem is the pesticide drift. And I have a friend in Turlock, California, whose neighbor is growing pot, and they said all of their grass and plants in their yard are dying. And both she and her significant other have respiratory problems because of the pesticides. Most of these guys growing it have pit bulls. They're armed. If you complain about it, we've had people that get their windows shot out. This has invited unsavory people from all over the world. And if you do it in Illinois, I promise you, you're going to have the same problem that we've had or that they've had in Colorado. We got cartels from Russia, Cuba, all over Latin America. You can't believe what your new neighbors are going to be like. So all of that has a diminishing value in real estate properties. So now in California, just so to make sure that our kids don't have any problem getting marijuana, you can grow 6 plants in your home. 6 plants grown hydroponically could produce 24 pounds of marijuana a year. That's the equivalent of about 28,800 joints. So for personal use, that's a joke. All we're doing is making new small drug dealers. And the more we make this seem like it's a reasonable proposition, as the perception of harm goes down, the use goes up with our kids. And for anybody less than 25 years old whose brains are not fully developed, this drug has life consequences that are devastating.
Well, I have a question too, Mr. Morgan.
Uh-huh.
You say the cartels, the Russian and Cuban cartels, et cetera, are involved in the marijuana industry in California, and I would assume Colorado too, other states. Why is that? I thought, why would they want to be involved in a product that is legal?
Because in their case, it's still not regulated. There's simply not enough desire or people or organizations to enforce the law. We can no longer count on the federal government. We can't count on the media to tell the truth. And if you give an open door policy, basically you're just inviting these people to come in because the conditions are right for growing it. Now, here we are in California. We supply 60 to 70 to 80% of the entire US market for marijuana. Now, diversion to other states is supposed to trigger federal intervention. There has been none since 2008 when Obama came into office. We were hoping the current administration would solve that problem, but so far they have not done that. Some reason to believe that President Trump still thinks this should be a states' rights issue. But basically what California is doing is really an assault on all Americans. We ship products that they did a study in February 2017 that showed that 93% of the products being sold were laden with pesticides that were potentially deadly. And rather than our state stopping that, as would have been the case with any other legal drug, they accommodated the pot industry by saying, we're going to give you until July 1st, 2018 to get this under control. So for basically a year and a half, we continue to supply products that were laden with pesticides. It's no different in Colorado. What's happening is the good people are just packing up and leaving The question anymore is, where do you go? As more states legalize this stuff, very, very dangerous.
Can we outrun marijuana?
You can't. Let's talk about the human harms. If you want to put that next slide up. There's a tremendous lack of knowledge among the general public today about the harms of this drug. Part of that is because the media has been controlled for over 20 years by billionaires, George Soros at the helm. What we know about it today, I mean, in the early 80s, when my kids got addicted to this, the potency of the drug was like 1/2 to 2%. What's happened today is in smoke form, the potency or the THC content has gone up to as high as 37%. Normally what they sell in California is 25% plus or minus. So it's a different drug. It's called skunk, not marijuana anymore. And then when you put it in concentrated form that is used in edibles and dabbing and vaping, the potency has gone all the way up to 99% in crystal form. And what's happening now is kids, rather than smoking marijuana, if you eat it or you vape it, it's not detectable because vaping has no odor. You can't tell they're consuming marijuana, whether it's nicotine or marijuana or whatever. And teenagers here in California have told me everybody vapes and everybody's using Xanax. Well, what that means, I don't know that everybody is, but Colorado, I think they lead the nation in terms of young people using this drug. But what happens is, number one, it causes permanent brain damage and loss of IQ later in life. It shrinks the hippocampus, which is the memory, learning, and cognition center of the brain. And you don't get it back. So basically the quality of the rest of your life is depending on what you're going to do as an adolescent. And it leads to psychotic breaks, which lead to violent acts and murder. Like the kid in Florida that killed 17 people. Turns out he was a heavy marijuana user and using other drugs as well, telling him to burn and destroy and to kill. Boston Marathon. Literally just about every mass murder that we've had in the last 10 years have been related to heavy marijuana user because it changes the brain. So it causes mental illness, got a 5 times greater chance. And I'm telling you, the numbers have gone up dramatically everywhere, both here and in the UK as well. We just saw numbers coming out of there that are very disturbing.
We've been told in Illinois that legalization of high potency marijuana will help to free up the criminal justice system, that fewer young people will go to jail, and especially minority kids, and police officers will be able to devote their attention to more serious offenses.
That is patently wrong. What happens is because you change the brain and you add mental illness and addiction, so people that are mentally ill or addicted can't work or work effectively, so they have to turn to crime. So the idea that you're going to free up law enforcement so they don't arrest somebody, we've already decriminalized marijuana, so if you're caught with an ounce of marijuana in most places like California, it's a $100 fine, less than a parking ticket. But I would encourage you, there's a study called Shoveling Up that was done by the National Center of Substance Abuse and Addiction, called CASA at Columbia University. And it shows the percentage of crimes that are created by people under the influence. In Sacramento, 59% of the people arrested for all crimes test positive for marijuana, 83% for any drug. And in Illinois, Chicago leads the nation, same problem. So you don't get rid of anything. If you elevate marijuana use, you elevate the level of crime. And anybody that thinks otherwise needs to really dig into that, because that's absolutely wrong. Other harms of marijuana are, well, let's just go to that slide. But I would just tell you that it's a gateway to the other drugs as well. Almost everybody that uses drugs that kill by overdose started their drug journey with marijuana. A lot of people like to argue that, but I would ask you to ask anybody that's been in the rehabilitation business or go to a prison. So this is not, people that say, well, you can use marijuana as an alternative to opioids. That's absolutely wrong. Marijuana is dangerous enough in its own right that there is absolutely no reason to use it. And so we look at the potency's gone up. People confuse the term medical marijuana when they talk about cannabidiol. Cannabidiol is an isolated component of a plant that has about 500 chemicals and 100 cannabinoids. So it's like we get penicillin from moss, but we don't call it medical moss. So the term medical marijuana was coined in order to give pot a good name as a first step towards legalization. Very confusing, and it should be banned. We have had an increase of marijuana use in America from 2008 until today of about 60%. We went from 15 million to 24 million users. If you look at who uses this stuff most, 18, 19, and 20 is where it peaks. And those are all brain damage years. And the biggest consumption is 18 to 25, followed by 17 to 25. So basically, we're dumbing down and destroying our young people. The options for how you consume it have increased with edibles, vaping, and detection is a lot harder, as I mentioned. We've got traffic deaths that have doubled in California and Colorado and Washington. What happens is this stuff stays in your brain for a month and it compounds with additional use. So you can argue about how long you should wait before you drive a vehicle, but I think like 13.6% of the population is using this drug today, and the population is at risk because of that. We just had a 19-year-old girl who was stoned, hit and killed somebody last week in my own community. It's funny, they talked about that on NBC on the news, and there's no mention of it in the paper. So the money behind marijuana really is controlling what we hear, and they're controlling public policy to a large degree. The only hope we have is with the people get enlightened on the true harms of this. The ER room visits have gone up exponentially. There's a lot of things that with this stronger drug that didn't happen before. One of them, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but I think it's hypermesis, where people have uncontrollable vomiting. They scream and they vomit. They call it scrommet. But these people are going to the hospital, and I think in Pueblo, Colorado, they get like 3 a day. And that on top of psychosis, which is becoming a real problem.
Well, are these people, though, doctor, who simply use too much marijuana? And yeah, if you use too much, you might have those things pop up, scromiting. What if you're just using it occasionally? That's not going to happen. Is that the case?
No. No, I don't believe that is the case. And particularly when you look at adolescent use. So even one time can trigger a psychotic event where they're paranoid and schizophrenic, and they're 7 times more likely to create or commit suicide. So you don't have to use a lot of it. And when you look at brain science, they tell you also even weekend users have a dramatic increase in their susceptibility to mental illness and loss of IQ. So it's a serious problem. There's another thing I want to mention that wasn't on that chart that in my opinion deserves everybody's attention. And that's that marijuana use by either parent before conception can cause chromosomal abnormalities in offspring, and not just the next baby born, but the next 4 generations. Okay, it causes mental and physical abnormalities. So
Wait a second. You said 4 generations?
that's right. It's even the studies they did 50 years ago showed that it could be mutagenic, which means that it might not affect the next baby, but it can skip over that baby and affect the next one. And some of the outcomes of that, one of them is anencephaly, where a baby's born without a skull.
Oh my.
Another one that they're finding, a friend in Australia who's an expert on the impacts, Dr. Reese, he's been studying the impact of gastroschisis related to marijuana use. And what that means is a baby is born with their bowels hanging out of their stomach.
Oh.
And so these are just the physical problems at birth, but it alters human behavior. Things like autism, there's a great correlation between the increase in marijuana use and autism. In 1975, I think 1 out of 5,000 kids were born with autism. Today, it's 1 out of 79. And for male babies, it's 1 out of 38. So if you don't think an autistic child will change your life, you're wrong. But it's just too scary. The people have to get enlightened on this drug and put a stop to it.
And you're talking about these terrible conditions that could happen to a child from the mother's use of legal marijuana?
It doesn't matter whether you call it legal or illegal. It's the same thing. So yes, and here in Colorado, they did a study of 4,000 dispensaries, and they posed as a pregnant woman. They said, I'm worried about nausea and vomiting and so forth. What would you prescribe? 70% of those dispensaries told these mothers to use marijuana. And that goes right into the placenta, right into the baby, the most vulnerable human in existence. So what we've done is by calling it medical marijuana, and now we have dispensaries with people that have no training on medicine. They have training on smoking pot, and they're prescribing what people should do. And it's devastating.
Well, let's continue with your PowerPoint presentation here.
So the economic cost of substance abuse, of which marijuana is a major contributor, should be of concern to everyone. As we discussed, the environmental damage alone is something that we've never dealt with alcohol and tobacco. The Office of National Drug Control says the cost to the judicial system is 193 billion, but that doesn't include the health problems. Again, the Center for Substance Abuse and Addiction at Columbia University, in one of the reports, said the health problems are $700 billion a year. Mental illness, if we take just 20% of mental illness caused by this, that's 120 billion. We have the homeless problem. We have a huge homeless problem in California. On record, 135,000 homeless people, but they say that's conservative. That's probably 61 billion. We've got welfare, we got traffic accidents. One traffic death, according to the National Administration for Traffic Safety, is $1.4 million. And we got high school dropouts. According to UC Santa Cruz, the lifetime cost of one high school dropout is $392,000. So we've got about 1.2, 1.3 million dropouts in America every year. If you add all of this up, you can't add all of these together because there's some overlap. But I would tell you that the cost of substance abuse, of which marijuana is the most prevalent drug, is over $1 trillion a year. If our elected officials, if Congress was ever inclined to study that, if they could cut it in half, like Reagan did, Reagan cut drug use by 63%. Okay, it can be done. We're never going to get rid of it because of the money involved, but we can make a real dent in it. If we cut it in half, it could be the solution to the budget problem in Washington, D.C.
Well, what would be a couple of your recommendations about cutting the drug dependence problem? What are some steps that need to happen? Obviously, we shouldn't legalize recreational marijuana, but what else?
Well, there's 4 things I would do if I were in charge of the Office of National Drug Control, and the president was behind this, and I hope that we'll live long enough to see him get behind it. Number 1, we need a saturation campaign to enlighten the American public on the dangers of this drug. Just as all the conversations you have in Illinois, all with good intent, and people want to do better, but they've had no access to the truth for the last 25 years. So number 1, we have to educate the masses. Secondly, we need to get drugs and alcohol off campus. That reduces the propensity to use by 4 to 5 times. This is very important, this next one, and controversial with good mothers. We need to implement suspicion-based and random-based drug testing in all schools. And I would say anymore, because elementary school kids are subjected to this as well. Any kid that shows signs of concern should be tested for marijuana and other drugs. Your window of opportunity to help them is narrow today because of the potency. But if you let it go, you can kiss that kid goodbye, just as I learned with my 2 kids. And lastly, we need student assistance programs in all middle and high schools, maybe even in elementary school. The ratio of counselors to students should be about 400 to 1. We corrected this in Coronado. We had in elementary school, we had a ratio of 1,200 kids to 1 counselor. And you can spot at-risk behavior even in 1st and 2nd grade kids. So those are 4 things that I think would solve this problem. But education is high on the list, and drug testing with the products that we have today, the edibles and the vaping particularly. The only way you can safeguard these kids in the future of our nation is to make sure that they don't do this. And drug testing is the best deterrent we know of.
All right. We have a few more PowerPoint presentations, so let's continue.
Okay, just to kind of summarize, number 1, we're not winning this battle. The drug money that creates policies, it takes a lot of money to win an election and a lot of money to keep an office. So it's one of the frailties of our democratic system, but there's too much drug money flowing, and it's not just in America, it's international now. I deal with Africa on a business basis, and I am very concerned. In Kenya, they're talking about legalizing marijuana. Here's a continent with 1.4 billion people today. And in Uganda, where I deal, the average age, the median age is 15.7 years old. So we've got a whole continent of adolescents that are very susceptible to the harms of marijuana. And if we create mental illness, addiction, more crime, more poverty, if you don't like the migration that happens today out of these countries, wait until the population doubles, which it's expected to do. So bottom line, we can't compete with drug money when it comes to lobbying our politicians. I think we have to take control of this again as the people. We can't buy the media coverage that drug money can. And again, here, I promise you, we're not getting the facts from mainstream media. We're also very fragmented in America in terms of drug prevention. We've got some entities like drug-free communities that get a grant from Office of National Drug Control. I think there's 1,450 of those. So they do a great job in their local community, generally speaking. But we have over 19,000 communities in America. All of them need to know the truth. They want to ignore the truth, so be it. But if they're never given the truth, they can't make an informed decision. So again, we're talking local law enforcement now, and they're overwhelmed. That's our last line of defense, unfortunately. So this battle really reverts back to the people. And whether we have a future or not, I personally believe marijuana will destroy this country if the people don't take it back. So again, searching how to do this. I mean, we not only have to communicate the truth, we have to have a way to pay for it. Most of us that have been doing this for decades, we don't get paid, and we all have to eat. We've got families to take care of. So my conclusion is that if we create a resource center, and I think it should be done outside of the government, but with input from our honorable scientists in the government that know very well what's going on. They just can't seem to get their programs implemented. But number one way to communicate with a lot of people is what you're doing with webinars. You can get to maybe 500 people. What we do normally in the drug prevention world is we have community meetings or coalition meetings maybe once a year. So we talk to each other, but we're not talking to the people. So I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. And then as a way to pay for it, who could we go to? You know, I think maybe service clubs, Rotary and Elks and Lions, Kiwanis, Seroptimus, if we could get them at a high level to encourage every one of their clubs, they've got 100,000 of them internationally combined. If they would encourage every club to donate $300 one-time cost and maybe $30 a month to sustain it, we could create a program that I think would be very effective, primarily focused on social media. So local law enforcement as well. I think every law enforcement community that has the funds has a youth outreach program. So we need to start. And I'm working on some things at the national level that I'm hoping will come to fruition. But again, this is a matter now for the people. If we don't act, then we're going to get what maybe we deserve.
Yeah. Well, you say this is an act for the people. What are a couple of the key talking points that they need to tell their lawmakers about marijuana? When it comes to marijuana, what can Joe Smith tell their state lawmaker to do? What are a couple of those things that they really need to stress to their lawmakers?
Well, first of all, I think at any level of government, the most important responsibility they have is to protect the people. And secondly, to protect our tax dollars. If you legalize marijuana, we don't need to guess about this anymore. Anybody that wants to see it firsthand can come to California or Colorado. We know that the costs vastly outweigh any benefits from an income standpoint. And you can only look at income. As with any business, you have to look at cost. So this argument about, hey, we can make a lot of money doing this, that's what sold California. We now have 2 quarters showing that the income projections were totally wrong. I think the income is about 20% of what was projected. And they never talk about the costs. Okay, they never talk about the $50 to $80 billion in environmental costs, but the human cost is something that every politician must be aware of what they're doing. And if we're going to make money on the backs of our children, then they have no future, nor do we as a nation.
You say the backs of our children, but the proponents will say, no, we're legalizing marijuana for adults 21 and older.
Well, forget it. Forget it. All you're doing is making it more readily available. Again, and marijuana use peaks at 18, 19, and 20. And So by making it legal, if you got an older brother that's 21 and you're 15, you've got easy access to marijuana. So it's not even good. I mean, if they're going to legalize it for personal use, they should start at age 25. That's what the American Society of Addiction Medicine proposed. You get closer to a mature brain so you don't have the damage for the rest of your life. But by legalizing it for adults or older, it's just insanity. You imply to children also that this is acceptable because it's a harmless drug, and it's not.
Yeah. When should parents start talking to their kids about marijuana?
I think if the parents are educated on the harms of marijuana. I mean, I have a brother that has two 18-year-old kids. I've talked to them about it. I don't want to get too pushy because I won't get invited over for Thanksgiving dinner. But what parents need to know is the quality and the longevity of a person's life is dependent on what they do as an adolescent because of brain development. And we know the brain is not fully developed until age 25 or 30. So parents need to talk to their kids about that. There's some educational programs. I hesitate to get into it. A guy named Stephen Glenn, who was the best family psychologist in the world, in my opinion, but he has a program called Developing Capable Young People. We implemented that in Coronado with great success. What it did is enable parents and kids to sit down rationally and talk about this, and taught kids that they're really responsible for their own actions. So if you say, if you're going to use marijuana, number one, you're not going to drive. If I had to do it over again, I might lock my kids in the utility room until they were adults. But
You get in trouble for that. Yeah.
I would make them have their hair tested 4 times a year. Hair testing gives you a 90-day window of detection, and you can't cheat the test. And this was to keep the kids safe and to give them a good future. This is not punishment. And we as adults have to take this problem and take control of it. You can't expect teenagers. I mean, we were all teenagers doing crazy stuff, but this is life-threatening. So parents need to understand the problem and educate themselves on the harms of this drug, and they need to talk to their kids. There's other studies in the past that said if you have dinner with your kids 4 or 5 times a week and you talk about it, and it's easier to give them a pizza and put them in front of the TV, but you got to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, maybe not just parents. How about the grandparents too? Yeah.
You know, there's, I think at last count, there were something like 6,000, that's understated. There's a lot of grandparents that are raising their kids today. I've got some great friends in Southern California that the kids got addicted to marijuana, meth, and went on to heroin. And then they just took a hike. So the grandparents end up with the kids.
Wow.
So serious problem, but this is an adult problem. We have to protect our kids.
All right. Well, we have one more slide with your contact information, and let's put that up. And Doctor, what can you tell us here? Or Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, there's a couple of references here. Silentpoison.com, again, highly recommended. And CasaColumbia.org. Look up the Shoveling Up study if you want to learn about the economic benefits. It's very revealing. They showed in, I think, all but 3 or 4 states, the income versus the cost. And what's alarming is California, I think all states, the maximum or that any state spent on prevention was like 2%. California was 1/3 of 1%, and 19.5% of our budget, which was $19.9 billion in 2005, was spent shoveling up the damage. So I highly recommend you look at that. My email is at the bottom. My website is TBAC, which stands for Take Back America Campaign. But if I can help, let me know.
All right. Thank you so much. Roger Morgan, founder and chairman of the Take Back America campaign. He's been on the front lines of anti-drug activism for some 20 years at the local, state, and national levels. You also have a book. Let's give a little plug for that. You're the author of Addiction and Soros, the Drug Lord, Pricking the Bubble of American Supremacy. You talked about George Soros a little earlier, but your book really goes into his involvement with marijuana and making sure it's legalized.
Yes, and in fact, it's a bit outdated now. Soros is the most evil guy in the world, in my opinion. I told him that once, so I don't have any reservations about saying that. But to show you the problem, his net worth went from $7 billion to $27 billion during the Obama regime. He basically has controlled drug policy, and he's the driving force behind this all over the world. So unfortunately, there's been no federal action to control him, and there should be. And I think he's guilty of treason and sedition. Just about all of the uprisings we have in America are related to George Soros.
Well, tell us what you really think about George Soros.
You don't have enough time.
Okay, all right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Mr. Morgan, for being part of NoWeedIllinois.com. And folks, you need to get in contact with your lawmakers. Tell them to vote no on the legalization of today's high-potency marijuana. If you want to make a call to Springfield, the phone number is 217-782-2000. Till next time, God bless.